Our first question type is assumption. Now what is an assumption? An assumption is something taken for granted, yeah, without proof, or understood without proof. What we're going to look at is, we're going to look at a statement followed with two assumptions. And we need to figure out which of those assumptions is implicit in the statement. Remember, implicit, something that is implied or understood, right? So we're going to keep that in mind. Now let's look at our statement. Irrespective of who comes to power, what is of prime importance is to heal the badly shaken lives of the people of State X, with the assurance that things would not go haywire in future. A citizen of State X has expressed this statement. Now, are there any words in this statement that are hampering you understanding the meaning or the purpose of the statement? Remember, I said one of the basic concepts that you need to keep in mind is language. So any words that you're getting stuck? What is assurance? Assurance is instilling confidence, right? And what is haywire? Haywire is crazy, out of control, right? So now we have an idea of what the statement is. Let's look at our assumptions. Assumption 1. The tenets of good governance and development must form the bedrock of the party that forms the next government in the state. Now, in this assumption, are there words hampering meaning? Yes. Tenets. Tenets means the principle, right? Opinion. Bedrock. Bedrock is the very basis, the foundation. Alright? Assumption 2. To concentrate on the prime needs of the citizen is the only way by which the image of tarnished State X can be improved. Again, in assumption 2, any words hampering meaning? Tarnished. Tarnished means to fall less off. You know, the state has fallen short of certain expectations that the people had, right? So it's got a bad reputation right now. So that's what tarnished means. Alright, so let's look at our statement. We know from the statement that it very clearly says who's going to come, the next party, right? The government. The idea is they need to instill confidence in the minds of the people, right? So let's look at both the statements and see which of these assumptions are implied or understood from the statement. So the first one, the tenets of good governance and development must form the bedrock of the party that forms the next government in the state. Now, if you look at this assumption, it very clearly says that good governance will automatically go ahead and instill the confidence that the people need. So, this is my clue. Good governance and development should be the basis. So, if this is the basic foundation of the next government coming in place, we can be assured that whatever the expectations the people have will be met, and you know, it will be a good healing process for them because such a good government has come, right? But at the second one, it says to concentrate on the prime needs of the citizen is the only way by which the image of tarnished State X can be improved. Now here, we can't go ahead and say that this assumption is understood from the statement simply because it doesn't give you an alternative, and it gives an ultimatum saying the only way to go ahead and restore this tarnished state is to concentrate on the prime needs of the citizen, which may not be necessarily true, right? So I'm going to go with assumption 1 stating this is the only assumption that is implied from the statement. So remember the 5 options. So assumption 1 is the only assumption that is implied in the statement, and all the other 4 categories does not apply here in this question. Let's look at another statement and the following assumptions. Let's look at our second statement. Faculty of a reputed institute XYZ has advised the students to buy ABC guides if they do not want to miss the opportunities of being recruited as PO. Alright, so this is our statement. So the faculty is telling them, boss, there are such and such books, you need to go buy them if you want to make sure that you scale the exam, right? Perform well. Now let's look at the first assumption. Students may ignore the advice and continue to prepare with the study materials provided only by coaching XYZ. Okay. And then assumption 2 states students of the institute XYZ have enough money to arrange for the books. Let's look at our first assumption. Now this is a reputed institute, right? So if a faculty tells you if such and such books will help you go ahead and do well in the exam, and you'll have higher chances of performing well, why would you ignore the advice? Very unlikely that the students would ignore the advice, right? Of course, they're going to prepare with the study materials provided, but not necessarily only by coaching, this particular coaching center, right? So it's very unlikely that this will happen. So this assumption is not understood or implied from the statement. Let's move to the second assumption. Students of the institute XYZ have enough money to arrange for the books. Now this is something that I can assume. Why from the statement? Because the faculty is assuming that everybody affords or can afford to buy the books, and that's why he's advising them to do so, right? So the statement doesn't say anything otherwise, right? So this is an assumption. This is a very direct assumption that we can make. Always remember, we need to look at what's a strong assumption, and what's a weak assumption. A strong assumption will be directly related to the statement, right? But a weak assumption may not be directly related to all of what the statement is covering. Maybe only to a trivial aspect of the statement, or may not be completely agreeing with the statement at all, right? So you need to differentiate that. So assumption 2 here is a very strong one that I can make. Faculty is telling them, please go and buy these books. He's advising them, and it's assumed that they can afford to buy the books, right? So the answer to this question is assumption 2, right? Let's look at another statement with the following assumptions. Let's look at our third statement. Our state does not need State Human Rights Commission. Therefore, we have abolished State Human Rights Commission. The Chief Minister of the state, of a state X, mentions this. He states this. And then we have 2 assumptions. Let's look at our assumptions. Assumption 1, there will be no cases of violation of human rights in state X. Assumption 2, state X has alternative provision to tackle cases of human rights violation. So we left with 5 options. Are we saying only assumption 1 is understood from the statement, or only assumption 2 is understood? That's second option. Option 3 is either assumption 1 or 2 is understood. Option 4 is neither assumption 1 or 2 is understood. Option 5 is both assumptions are understood from the statement. So the Chief Minister of State X is saying we don't need State Human Rights Commission, therefore we have abolished it. So if I look at assumption 1, there will be no cases of violation of human rights in state X. This is the assumption the Chief Minister is making, and that is why he is very categorically or very confidently saying we don't need State Rights Commission, because we're not going to have any issues. So I can take assumption 1 that it is understood from the statement. Let's look at assumption 2. State X has alternative provision to tackle cases of human rights violation. Now, the Chief Minister of State X is saying this. When the Chief Minister is making a decision such as this, in case there is something, obviously we are assuming that there will be a backup measure or there will be an alternative measure, without which he cannot go ahead and point blankly say a candid statement like that, right? So I can also say that assumption 2, assuming that in case, first of all they are saying there will not be any cases of violation, that's why we don't need it. But in case, there is always a but and an if. And when they are making a decision like this, they will consider the cons as well. We are assuming that, right? So assuming that in case there is something like that, I'm sure they have a backup measure and an alternative provision to tackle such cases. So in this scenario, I can safely go ahead and say, either assumption 1 or assumption 2 is understood from this statement, right? Alright, let's move to our next statement with the following assumptions. Always use zebra crossings and subways to cross the road safely. A notice by the City Traffic Police. That's the statement. Let's look at our assumptions. Assumption 1. Road safety is not an option but a must for pedestrians. Assumption 2. Safety can be increased by making people aware of tips regarding road safety. So we're going to see which of these assumptions. So is it only assumption 1 that is implied from the statement, or is it only assumption 2, or is it either assumption 1 or 2, or is it neither assumption 1 or 2, or if both the assumptions are implied from the statement. So we have some clue words from the statement assisting or helping us to form strong assumptions here, right? So if I look at my first assumption, road safety is not an option but a must for pedestrians, right? So there are clue words. It says always use zebra crossing. So if you want to remain safe on the road, then you don't have an option. If you use the zebra crossings, there are higher chances of you ensuring safety on the road, right? So assumption 1 seems like a strong assumption derived from the statement. Road safety is not an option but a must for pedestrians. Okay, let's move to assumption 2. Safety can be increased by making people aware of tips regarding road safety. So how are they creating this awareness? By the notice, right? So let's take a small example. You know, if you want to park your bike or a car, if there is a no parking signboard, you normally tend to park it there. But if there is a no parking signboard, then it grabs your attention. You stop, you consider it, and most likely you will not park it there, right? So when there is a notice, the idea of a notice or the function of a notice is to grab your attention. So you consider it and you adhere to it and you follow it. So is the city police creating that or trying to create that? Of course, yes. It's a notice stating always use zebra crossings and subways. So they are trying to create or capture the attention of the public so that they can follow that particular notice, right? So safety can be increased by making people aware of tips regarding road safety. Absolutely yes. This is an assumption that I can derive from the statement. So in this scenario, if you see, both the assumptions are inferred or implied from the statement. Alright, so I will say assumption 1 and assumption 2 can be assumed or implied from the statement. So let's go ahead and look at our next question type, which is arguments.